I never thought my story would be something strangers listened to for comfort, but life has a way of turning quiet pain into shared truth. For years, I believed love meant endurance, patience, and staying calm even when your heart felt uneasy. I thought if I stayed gentle and understanding, everything would work itself out. What I didn't realize was how slowly I was disappearing inside my own marriage. This isn't a story about screaming matches or dramatic scenes. It's about the kind of betrayal that hides behind routines and smiles. It's about the moment a woman realizes that silence isn't strength if it costs her self-respect. This is how a quiet affair forced me to face the truth, and how that truth became the first step toward rebuilding my confidence. I used to believe silence meant safety, like if I didn't ask hard questions, nothing bad could touch me. Daniel and I had been married for 11 years, living in a small Ohio town where everyone waved at red lights and remembered your coffee order. Our house wasn't fancy, but it was ours, filled with soft routines and predictable evenings. For a long time, that felt like enough. Daniel worked in sales, I worked part-time at the local library, and our life followed a rhythm I trusted. Then something shifted, quietly at first. He started coming home later, always with a reason that sounded reasonable. Meetings ran long, clients needed extra attention. I nodded and said, I get it, even when my chest felt tight. One night while we were eating dinner, I asked, You're working late again tomorrow? He didn't look up from his phone. Yeah, big account, you know how it is. I do, I said, even though I didn't. He started guarding his phone like it held state secrets. If I walked into the room, he'd tilt the screen away. If it buzzed, he'd smile in a way I hadn't seen in years. I told myself I was imagining things. Marriage gets boring sometimes, I thought. People drift and come back. Still, the quiet felt heavier than before, like the air was pressing down on me. One evening, I was folding laundry in the bedroom, enjoying the rare peace of an empty house. Daniel had gone out for errands, and his tablet was charging on the dresser. I wasn't snooping. I had no intention of touching it. Then the screen lit up with a message notification. A woman's name I didn't recognize appeared, followed by a red heart emoji. My hands froze around a towel. My stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. I whispered to myself, calm down, it could be nothing. But my heart knew better. I didn't open the message. I didn't scream or throw the tablet. I just stood there breathing slowly, choosing silence because it felt safer than truth. When Daniel came home, I acted normal. Hey, he said, kissing my cheek. Hey, I replied, forcing a smile. You okay? Just tired. Over the next few weeks, I paid attention in a way I never had before. Tuesday meetings that always ran late. Weekend errands that took hours. Sudden interest in his appearance. New shirts, new cologne. I felt foolish for noticing these things, like I was betraying him by doubting him. One night while we sat on opposite ends of the couch, I tried to reach for his hand. He pulled away without realizing it. Did I do something? I asked softly. No, he said quickly. I'm just stressed. We barely talk anymore, I said. We're fine, he replied, his voice firm. Don't start. That word, start, shut me down. I learned to swallow my questions and convince myself that love meant patience. But inside, something was breaking. I started replaying moments in my head, wondering when I had become so small. I avoided mirrors because I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. One afternoon, my friend Carla stopped by unannounced. She looked around and said, You feel different lately. I'm just tired, I told her. She studied me for a moment and asked, Are you happy? I opened my mouth to answer and nothing came out. That scared me more than any message ever could. That night, Daniel came home late again. Do you even miss me? I asked, surprising myself. He sighed. Why are you making this into something? Because it already is something, I said quietly. He stared at me like I was speaking another language. We went to bed without resolving anything, our backs turned to each other. I lay awake, listening to his breathing, realizing the real betrayal wasn't just the possibility of an affair. It was how far I had gone to keep the peace, how much of myself I had erased. The next morning, I looked at my reflection and said out loud, You deserve the truth. My voice shook, but it felt real. I didn't know what I would find or how it would end. I only knew I couldn't stay silent anymore, and that decision would change everything. Finding proof wasn't easy, but it didn't require the dramatic spying you see in movies. I realized quickly that I needed patience and focus. I started by checking phone records, carefully noting repeated calls to the same number at odd hours. Each notification, each pattern, added to a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to complete. Still, the instinct to know the truth was stronger than the fear of what it might reveal. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one rainy afternoon, a notebook open, jotting down every call, every text time stamp, my hands shaking and heart racing. Carla had insisted I shouldn't do this alone, but I needed to feel in control. Are you sure about this? She asked over the phone. I have to be, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Just promise me you won't lose yourself. I won't, I said, though part of me knew she couldn't guarantee that. A few days later, I decided to follow him. I parked down the street from the cafe he mentioned as a meeting spot, hands tight around the steering wheel, nerves screaming. I watched him walk in hand with a woman who laughed in a way that made my stomach twist. I didn't rush inside. I sat there, breathing slowly, focusing on the clarity of what I was seeing rather than the chaos it caused inside me. After he left, I went home and printed the photo. I laid it on the kitchen table with the phone records, my hands trembling. When Daniel walked in, he immediately noticed the papers. "What's this?" he asked, his voice tight. "It's the truth," I said. He went pale. I can explain. "I want to hear it," I said calmly, sitting down across from him. He tried excuses. It was nothing serious, just stress relief. "You know how work is." "I know how work is," I said, "but how long were you planning to let me doubt myself?" He looked down at the table. I didn't think what? His lips pressed together and he looked away. "I wasn't thinking. That's your excuse, not thinking. I was stupid. I know that now. I need more than knowing. I need honesty." The confession came slowly, hesitantly. He admitted to a quiet affair, calling it meaningless, as if labeling it that way made it hurt less. I stared at him, feeling a mix of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. "So, when did this start?" I asked. "Months ago," he admitted, eyes welling. I didn't plan for it to go this far. "You were holding a life outside our marriage," I said, my voice trembling but firm. I know," he whispered. "I regret it, I swear I regret it every day." "Regret doesn't fix trust," I said. He tried to justify it with tears and apologies, but none of it changed the fact that I had watched the evidence with my own eyes. He packed a bag, saying he needed space. "You'll regret what you've done," he warned. "I hope you realize that." "I hope you realize the same," I said softly. When the door closed behind him, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. The confrontation wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a journey that would force me to decide who I wanted to be. I called Carla immediately. "He left?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. "Yes," I said, "and I'm not sure what comes next." "You're stronger than you think," she said. "I hope you're right." Over the next few days, I focused on myself. I went to the library, spent hours rearranging books, cleaning, and finding small pockets of peace. Yet the ache remained, a reminder that nothing would return to normal quickly. I spoke to friends in hushed tones, testing the waters of my own feelings. "I don't even know who I am anymore," I confessed to Carla one afternoon. "You're finding out," she said. "This is your moment to see yourself clearly." I spent nights lying awake, going over conversations, remembering smiles, and noting the differences in his behavior. Every text, every late night, every excuse became a data point. My mind was a mix of sorrow and determination. I realized I had to act not out of vengeance, but out of clarity. I couldn't let his choices define my worth. Weeks passed. Daniel called several times, each call making my stomach twist. "Can we talk?" he asked one evening. "About what?" I replied. "Everything," he said. "I think we already have," I said, keeping my tone neutral. When he came by one afternoon, I stayed calm. "I need to know if you're capable of honesty truly," I said. "I am," he said, voice earnest. "I swear." "Prove it," I said. Over coffee, I asked about details he tried to hide. He stumbled over timelines, excuses, and half-truths. I didn't argue, I simply recorded what I observed. Each word, each hesitation strengthened my resolve. I realized that honesty, not punishment, was the path forward. One evening, I sat alone and whispered, "I need to rebuild myself first." It was a mantra that kept repeating. Daniel's warnings about regret no longer frightened me. I understood that the true danger was losing myself, and I wasn't going to let that happen. I began thinking of next steps, not for revenge, but for reclaiming my life. I planned small actions, reconnecting with friends, organizing my space, creating routines that reminded me who I was outside the marriage. Each step felt empowering, though my heart still ached. "Do you think you'll ever forgive him?" Carla asked. "I don't know," I said. "Right now I just want to survive me." That night I wrote in my journal, "Truth is terrifying, but silence is worse." I realized that the confrontation wasn't the end, it was a turning point. I had chosen to face reality, and that choice was mine alone. Daniel's absence was deafening at first, but it also gave me clarity. I could hear myself again, my own thoughts without him overshadowing them. I started noticing details about myself I had ignored. How I laughed, how I moved, how I felt about my own reflection. Each small realization was a brick in rebuilding my confidence. At work, I threw myself into organizing a community reading program. I laughed with coworkers, shared ideas, and felt sparks of joy I hadn't felt in years. One day, a young girl asked me, "Why do you always smile like that?" "I just like my job," I said, smiling genuinely. Returning home, I would sit on the couch Daniel had abandoned and imagine what I wanted life to look like. My mind no longer raced with questions about what he was doing, but with what I wanted to become. The betrayal was a shadow that refused to leave, but I was learning to step into the light. One afternoon, I found a letter he had left on the kitchen counter. "I hope you find happiness, even if not with me." I folded it carefully and tucked it in a drawer. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an apology, it was acknowledgement. I realized I didn't need him to fix anything, I needed myself. "Do you ever regret staying?" Carla asked during a phone call. "Every day," I admitted. "But not for the reasons you think. I regret losing myself in silence. Evenings were the hardest. I would stare out the window, watching neighbors laugh, kids play, couples walk dogs, and I felt both envy and longing. But I no longer let it consume me. I reminded myself that the life I wanted required action, clarity, and self-respect. At night, I would whisper to myself, "You are enough, you deserve truth." Those words became armor. When Daniel called again, I answered briefly, "I'm working on myself right now, maybe we can talk later." His silence on the other end was almost satisfying. Every detail, every record, every confirmation of his betrayal had one effect. It sharpened my resolve. I would not shrink to protect someone who disregarded my worth. I began planning not out of malice but to reclaim my identity and dignity. Carla came over one evening, wine in hand. "You're different," she said. "I know," I said. "I feel different. I can breathe again." "And Daniel, I don't know what he'll do," I admitted, "but I'm not waiting around to find out. I'm building myself first." By the end of that week, I had organized my evidence, prepared my thoughts, and felt something I hadn't in years: control. I knew confrontation would come again, but this time I wouldn't be a trembling shadow. I would stand firm. The decision to face the truth had already changed everything. I sat on the couch, holding my notebook, writing out my next steps. This is about me now, not him, not the affair, me. The weight of fear had lifted slightly, replaced with determination. I could see a path forward. The betrayal had not destroyed me, it had made me aware. When Daniel returned home unexpectedly that evening, I was ready. He opened the door nervously. "Can we talk?" he asked. "I think we already have," I said, standing straight, meeting his eyes. His mouth opened, but I held up my hand. "Not yet, first I need to be sure of myself." "Then maybe we can talk." He nodded, a flash of uncertainty crossing his face. For the first time in months, I felt powerful in my own quiet way. I knew that the confrontation hadn't ended anything, it had only begun the real journey. And that journey, I realized, would define the next chapter of my life. I was no longer just a wife reacting to betrayal. I was a woman reclaiming herself. The truth was terrifying, but silence would have destroyed me. And that choice, the choice to seek proof, to face the betrayal, to hold myself steady, was the beginning of everything. I didn't want loud, dramatic revenge. I wanted something quieter, more honest. The kind of revenge that rebuilds you rather than destroys someone else. After the confrontation with Daniel, I realized the path forward wasn't about making him suffer. It was about reclaiming myself. I started by focusing on the parts of my life I had ignored while trying to maintain a picture-perfect marriage. I went back to work full-time at the library, reconnecting with colleagues I had grown distant from, and I started volunteering at the local community center again. I felt the small spark of life returning in ways I hadn't experienced in years. One evening, Carla stopped by with a bottle of wine. "You're glowing," she said, pouring us each a glass. "Is this me or just survival?" I smiled. "Maybe both, but mostly me." Even as I rebuilt my life, I quietly gathered more facts. I wanted clarity, not drama. I discovered that the woman, Melissa, had no idea Daniel was married the entire time. Her ignorance shocked me, and it made me realize the affair wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was a lie layered over another innocent life. I crafted a calm, honest message to her, presenting the facts without insults or accusations. I explained that Daniel had misrepresented himself and that she deserved the truth. I pressed send and waited. A few hours later, her response arrived. "I had no idea, I'm so sorry." Her apology was heartfelt and she ended things immediately. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation I had imagined in my head, but it was far more satisfying. The twist, however, came weeks later. Daniel, seemingly contrite, asked to come back. He claimed he had learned his lesson, that he wanted to rebuild what we had. I invited him to a counseling session. I didn't argue or yell. Instead, I calmly explained my decision. I had already filed for separation. His eyes widened, his confidence faltered, and for the first time I saw him uncertain. "I've changed," he said. "I've realized what I've done." "Can we try again?" "I've made my choice," I said softly, "and it's not about revenge, it's about me." "But he began, stumbling. "No," I interrupted, "it's over. I'm not waiting for you to fix anything, I'm fixing myself." For the first time, I felt peace. I realized that Daniel's approval, which I had once craved, was no longer necessary. I had learned the truth, faced the betrayal, and chosen myself over the illusions he maintained. Walking out of the counseling office alone, I felt lighter than I had in years. Over the next few weeks, Daniel tried reaching out texts, calls, even a handwritten letter. I read each one and smiled privately, understanding that none of it would manipulate me anymore. I returned to my routines, filled my apartment with plants and books, and allowed myself to laugh again without guilt. One afternoon, while organizing the library shelves, a colleague asked, "You seem different, happier." "I am," I said. "It's taken work, but I'm finding myself again." I spent time with friends I had ignored, reconnecting and sharing moments I hadn't experienced in years. Dinner parties, book clubs, and long walks reminded me that life was still full of joy. I also took time for therapy, understanding the patterns that had made me quiet my voice and diminish myself. Each session revealed layers of my own strength I hadn't realized existed. One evening, Carla and I sat on my balcony watching the sunset. "So, what's your plan if he keeps trying?" she asked. "My plan," I said, "is to keep living my life. I'm not interested in revenge that hurts me more than him. He's already faced the consequences of his choices." She nodded. "You've changed everything without even raising your voice." "I guess," I said, "sometimes the quietest actions are the most powerful." Then came the moment of clarity. Weeks after the affair's exposure, I realized that the true power of revenge wasn't in public humiliation or confrontation. It was in truth, in calm actions, in living authentically while someone else dealt with the consequences of their mistakes. Daniel had assumed that begging or promises could undo the damage. But the real damage had already been done to him, to me, and to the life we shared. And yet I felt no malice, only clarity. When he called one evening, I answered calmly. "I need to see you," he said. "I don't think that's a good idea," I replied. "But I've changed," he insisted. "I believe you believe that," I said, "but I've changed too. And my life doesn't revolve around your choices anymore." After that conversation, I stopped answering. I allowed myself to fully focus on the life I wanted, free from guilt, manipulation, or fear. I embraced independence and rediscovered my sense of self-worth. Each day, I found more joy in small victories: cooking a meal I enjoyed, reading a novel without distraction, laughing with friends. The betrayal, once a heavy weight, became a lesson etched into my understanding of myself. One afternoon, I ran into Melissa at a local cafe. We shared a quiet, meaningful conversation. She thanked me again for the honesty and expressed how much it had changed her understanding of relationships and trust. I smiled. "It's not about punishment. It's about truth." She nodded, and I realized that confronting the affair's ripple effects had given me insight, empathy, and perspective. Meanwhile, Daniel began appearing more uncertain in our community. His attempts to maintain normalcy at work and among friends faltered. People noticed the shift. He wasn't humiliated by public exposure, but by the reality of choices, accountability, and consequences. I didn't take satisfaction in watching him struggle. I took satisfaction in knowing that truth naturally restored balance without my interference. One evening, I wrote in my journal, "Revenge isn't yelling. Revenge is living fully while truth catches up." That thought became my mantra. I spent nights reflecting on the years I had spent minimizing my voice and ignoring my instincts. Each reflection strengthened my resolve. I realized I had been complicit in my own quiet suffering by believing that peace meant silence. Carla visited again, sipping tea. "You're glowing, truly. I can see how much you've grown." "I finally understand," I said, "that I don't need anyone to validate me. Not him, not Melissa, not even society. I validate myself." The final twist came quietly. Daniel requested one last meeting, saying he wanted closure. I agreed, not out of obligation, but to assert my power in a controlled space. When he arrived, I explained calmly, "You've faced your truth, I've faced mine, our lives diverge here. But I love you," he said, his voice shaky. "I deserve honesty more than words," I replied. "And you've shown me that honesty isn't something you can consistently offer." I love myself enough to walk away. As I walked out of that office alone, I felt something extraordinary: peace. Not the hollow peace of denial, but the quiet, steady peace of someone who has reclaimed herself. The betrayal had tried to define me, but I refused. Each step I took afterward was deliberate, conscious, and liberating. From reconnecting with friends to focusing on career, hobbies, and therapy, I noticed a profound shift in my confidence. I laughed louder, spoke my mind more freely, and no longer doubted my instincts. Even the small interactions, like chatting with neighbors or smiling at strangers, reminded me of a self I had almost forgotten. When Daniel finally stopped calling, I didn't feel relief in the way you might expect. I felt closure. I had chosen my own path, set boundaries, and embraced my independence. The affair, once a source of pain and humiliation, had become a catalyst for growth, honesty, and quiet power. Sitting in my apartment one night, candlelight flickering on the walls, I whispered to myself, I am enough, I am whole, I am true to myself. For the first time in years, I believed it. And in that belief, I discovered that revenge doesn't have to hurt anyone else. Sometimes, it simply means walking away with your dignity intact and your spirit stronger than ever. The karma didn't arrive as a dramatic spectacle. It arrived quietly, steadily, like the turning of the seasons, and in ways I hadn't expected. Daniel struggled publicly after our separation became known, not because I exposed him or tried to shame him, but because the truth spoke for itself. People began noticing subtle shifts. Friends who had admired our perfect marriage suddenly whispered about his repeated absences, colleagues questioned his excuses, and neighbors picked up on small cracks that had always been there. Meanwhile, I maintained a calm, steady presence. I moved into a smaller apartment, one that was modest but filled with light and space, and it felt larger than the house we had shared. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I spent my mornings enjoying coffee on the balcony, feeling the sun on my skin and listening to the hum of the town below. It was ordinary life, but it felt extraordinary. I reconnected with friends, building a support network that reminded me I wasn't defined by a marriage, by betrayal, or by the choices of another person. My work at the library flourished as well, organizing programs, leading community events, and watching families engage with books and learning gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't realized I'd lost. One afternoon, my coworker Jenna commented, "You seem lighter, happier." I smiled genuinely. I am. It's taken time, but I'm finding myself again. Daniel reached out several times, hoping to rebuild, apologize, or at least reclaim a sense of control over me. Each attempt was met with calm boundaries. I appreciate your words, I told him during a phone call, but my life isn't something to negotiate. His voice faltered on the other end, a mixture of regret and disbelief. He had expected anger, confrontation, or at least desperation, but he found none. Months passed. Slowly, Daniel began admitting to people the consequences of his actions. Friends and colleagues noticed his struggle, and his discomfort became evident without me needing to explain a single detail. His story was no longer the story of a charming husband, but of someone facing the consequences of choices he had made. I didn't gloat or intervene. I simply lived my life authentically, letting truth and honesty do the work that anger or revenge never could. Meanwhile, I explored hobbies I had ignored: painting, yoga, and long walks by the river. Each activity reminded me that life existed beyond the boundaries of my marriage. I laughed freely, spoke openly, and learned to trust my instincts again. When my neighbor commented one evening, "You seem unstoppable," I simply smiled. It wasn't about impressing anyone, it was about recognizing my own strength. Even small interactions, like meeting Melissa at a cafe months later, reminded me of the power of truth. She had apologized again for unknowingly being part of the affair, and shared how the honesty had changed her perspective on relationships and trust. "I never knew what honesty really meant," she said quietly. I nodded. "It's not about punishment. It's about clarity." That moment reinforced what I had already begun to understand. When you face betrayal with truth and self-respect, justice doesn't need to shout, it arrives naturally. Work, friends, hobbies, and quiet reflection created a foundation for my confidence. I began mentoring younger women at the library, sharing experiences about boundaries, self-respect, and intuition. Conversations flowed naturally, and each time I spoke honestly about my journey, I realized how far I had come. The betrayal that had once consumed me no longer held power over my emotions or choices. I had reclaimed my identity, and nothing could take it from me. Daniel eventually admitted, both privately and to mutual friends, that losing both the affair and our marriage forced him to confront who he had become. I wished him healing and meant it. There was no lingering bitterness, no desire to humiliate or punish. I had learned that true justice comes not from revenge, but from living authentically and allowing the natural consequences of choices to unfold. One quiet evening, sitting on my balcony with a cup of tea, I reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the confrontation, the affair, the rebuilding of my life. It had all been painful, but it had all been necessary. I realized that the quiet affair, which had once threatened to destroy me, had become the catalyst for self-discovery, empowerment, and peace. I whispered to myself, I am whole, I am strong. I am enough. I also recognized a subtle truth. Sometimes karma doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, unfolding through small shifts, lost opportunities, and the gentle realignment of people's lives. Daniel's struggle, the rebuilding of my friendships, the respect I regained at work, all of it was quiet, understated, and profoundly satisfying. It was the kind of justice that didn't require spectacle. It was earned through honesty, patience, and integrity. Life moved forward. I filled my days with meaningful experiences, volunteering at the community center, hosting small gatherings for friends, and pursuing personal projects I had postponed for years. I laughed, I cried, I reflected, and I grew. Every step of the way, I honored the lessons learned from betrayal. Trust your instincts, value yourself, and never let silence protect. One evening, Daniel attempted a final conversation, hoping to reopen old wounds or sway me with promises of change. I met him with calm eyes. I hope you've learned from all this, I said. I have, he admitted, I really have. And I hope you can find peace, I continued, because I have. That exchange was not triumphant or dramatic, it was quiet, composed, and absolute. I walked away knowing that my life no longer revolved around him. I had chosen myself, my confidence, and my peace. As months turned into a year, I continued to grow, forming new routines, developing deeper friendships, and strengthening my sense of self. I no longer questioned my instincts. I no longer allowed past fear or betrayal to define me. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who trusted herself, honored her worth, and walked through life with dignity. The lesson I carried was simple yet profound. When betrayal strikes, silence may protect lies, but truth rebuilds people. The quiet affair that once threatened to unravel me had instead given me the opportunity to reclaim my life without apology. Justice arrived naturally, not through anger or revenge, but through clarity, self-respect, and living authentically. I learned that confidence isn't given by others. It's reclaimed, cultivated, and protected through decisions that honor your own worth. Betrayal, as painful as it is, can become a turning point rather than an endpoint. And in that turning, you discover that peace, dignity, and happiness aren't dependent on anyone else. They reside within you. Now, when I walk through the town, sit at the library, or enjoy a quiet evening at home, I feel the steady presence of strength I once thought I had lost. Daniel's choices no longer have power over me. The past serves as a reminder of lessons learned, but it doesn't dictate my present or my future. I am the author of my life, and for the first time, I truly believe that. This is what true karma feels like, not revenge, not drama, but the gentle, enduring consequence of honesty, integrity, and the courage to choose yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. What started as a quiet betrayal became the catalyst for a journey I never expected, a journey of self-discovery, courage, and reclaiming my life. I learned that silence can protect lies, but truth rebuilds people. Facing betrayal with honesty and self-respect doesn't just expose the wrongdoing, it strengthens the one who was hurt. Life isn't about revenge or punishment. It's about making choices that honor your worth, trusting your instincts, and moving forward with confidence. The quiet affair that once threatened to destroy me instead became the opportunity to find my voice, my strength, and my peace. If there's one thing I want you to take away, it's this. When you stand for yourself, justice has a way of arriving naturally. And the life you build afterward can be brighter than anything you imagined.